Week 4, Overview, Deadlock and Death. World War I grinds on this week as we focus on 1915 and 1916. Younger students can learn details about the war by doing related hands-on projects. For dialectic students, we've suggested this be a mini-report week. Rhetoric readings follow the attacks and counterattacks on the Western, Eastern, and Baltic fronts and begin a 3-week study of the reasons for the Russian Revolution in 1917. There's one more major theme for rhetorics this week, the rise of statism. That means control by or devotion to a government, in both the Allied and Central Powers as the war progressed. The nature of the war forced Western European governments to go further than they'd ever gone before in intruding into the daily lives of their people. As the Allies and Central Powers became locked in stalemate, and every able-bodied man, woman, and child was drawn into the conflict, governments took over industries, utilities, monetary systems, even food production and distribution. This broke ground for some states to continue to do so in the years that followed the war, as we'll learn in future week plans. In 1915, the Germans wanted to take back a bulge of land in France that the Allies stubbornly held. A few captured German prisoners had revealed a plan to use deadly chlorine gas to attack the Allied trenches, but no Allied leaders worried about their warning. Then the Germans released 6,000 canisters of the poison. Because chlorine is heavier than air, it sank into the Allied trenches, burning the soldiers' lungs and throats, causing them to drown in fluid from their own lungs. When unprotected soldiers realized the gas was drifting into their trenches, they ran for cover, dying as they breathed in the fumes that poisoned the battlefield. Because of the devastating effects of the poison gas, German soldiers in gas masks gained a great deal of ground and dug in just 2 miles from the French city of Ypres. News of the gas attack spread worldwide. It was one of the most horrific war scenarios in the history of warfare. An international treaty prohibited firing artillery shells filled with poison gas, but the Germans didn't use artillery to launch the attack. The Allies still treated the German attack as an atrocity and started developing and using their own chemical weapons. By 1915, more than 4 million soldiers lived on the trenches on either side. Trench life involved a lot of waiting and patience. During the daylight, it was too dangerous to move in the open, so men huddled in the trenches, cleaning their weapons, doing chores, trying to rest. The night provided more opportunities to repair the barbed wire that protected the trenches, to recover dead or wounded soldiers, or sometimes capture a prisoner. Such activities were always risky, however, because an enemy flare could suddenly light up the night sky over no man's land, giving enemy machine gunners an easy target. Life in the trenches was traumatic. 1 in 50 British soldiers suffered from shell shock, a term that described a complete mental and physical shutdown. A shell-shocked victim was often unable to think clearly, trembled with convulsions, cowered at the slightest noise, and often could not talk. Many who succumbed to shell shock ran away, or they wounded themselves so that they could leave the front, or they committed suicide. In the reserve trenches behind the front lines, there was more time for relaxation. Some men participated in shooting contests, they wrote letters home, sometimes they scavenged for weapons in the older areas of the battlefield. The reserve trenches served as a home away from home, with beds, tables and chairs, newspapers, electric lighting, even gramophone records. Although both officers and men fought in the trenches, the officers spent more time behind the lines during their leadership tasks. Some enjoyed lavish dining accommodations, even shooting parties. This was often a point of suspicion for the soldiers, who sometimes had difficulty trusting these privileged men to lead them into battle facing certain death. As armies dug into the ground, navies dove under the waves. Submarines changed the way sea battles were fought. By May 15, 1915, the island of Britain was surrounded by a German submarine blockade. The Germans were ordered to sink any vessel that might be carrying enemy troops or supplies. The Lusitania was a British ocean liner, renowned as one of the biggest and fastest passenger ships in the world. Although the morning newspapers announced that no ship should enter the war zone around Britain, the Lusitania's captain dismissed the caution, thinking the Germans would never dare attack a passenger ship as famous as the Lusitania. When a German U-boat spotted the Lusitania, however, it fired a torpedo directly into it. Within 18 minutes, the Lusitania had sunk under the waves, killing 1,198 people, including 120 Americans. The attack on the Lusitania caused international outrage, especially in Britain and the United States. President Woodrow Wilson sent the German government strong protests demanding an immediate end to submarine warfare. Anti-German sentiments became strong in the United States, and people felt it would not be long before America joined the war. Submarines weren't the only new engines of war. With the stalemate of trench warfare on land, Germans looked for another way to attack their enemy. The Germans designed a Zeppelin, a new type of aircraft that could drop bombs straight down on the enemy. The designer of the Zeppelin, Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, hoped his airship would enable Germany to rule the skies. The new airship was a tube-shaped frame filled with multiple balloons that had a compartment attached to its underbelly which could carry passengers or bombs above the trenches. The Zeppelin relied on 12 balloons harnessed together to lift it off the ground. The frame that united them was made of metal hoops and was covered in tough fabric. At first, the German naval commanders used Zeppelins on reconnaissance patrols. Some German politicians thought Zeppelins were too expensive to use as bombers. But in 1915, after successful use in bombing Belgian forts at Liège and Antwerp, the Kaiser gave orders for Zeppelins to attack British towns. In 1915, Zeppelins bombed Paris and the east coast of England. Blackouts, where all citizens kept their lights blocked from outside view with shades, were then enforced to keep airborne spies from spotting their targets. The people on the ground came to fear the awful sound of the airship approaching through the darkness. By early 1916, however, the Zeppelin threat was reduced. British fighter planes were armed with a type of bullet that set fire to the gas in the airships. Although airplanes were a recent invention, both the Allies and Central Powers quickly began to use them as new weapons too. At first, about the only thing enemy pilots could do is to shoot at each other with pistols when they met in the air. Within a short time, however, they tried mounting machine guns on the planes. Unfortunately, when pilots pointed their machine guns straight ahead, they tended to shoot off their own propellers. A French pilot put steel deflectors on his propeller blades to bounce the bullets off. Then a Dutch designer named Anthony Fokker improved the German planes by adding a synchronization gear that fired the bullets through the gaps between the rotating propeller blades. His was the first truly successful fighter plane. Fokker's plane initially devastated the Allied Air Force, but both sides kept building better warplanes. A German fighter pilot named Manfred Baron von Richthofen was known as the Red Baron because of his bright red plane. His and the other brightly painted German aircraft were nicknamed the Flying Circus by the Allied soldiers. Each country's best fighter pilots were known as aces. American ace Eddie Rickenbacker shot down 26 planes in just a few months. Frenchman Georges Guynemer had 53 kills. None of them equal the Red Baron, however, who scored 80 kills. By late 1917, Allied air power overtook the Germans. Britain's new Sopwith Camel was the best plane in the air. Baron von Richthofen was shot down in 1918, and the Flying Circus was soon destroyed. The Allies finally dominated the sky. The pressures of modern warfare changed more than the front lines. There were changes on the home front, too. As we mentioned before, nations had to put their domestic economy on a war footing to survive. While some men signed up to fight on the battlefield, others went to work in munitions factories and other war-related industries. In some countries, men had to be called home from the front to work in factory positions on the home front. In the emergency of war, women started filling jobs that had only been open to men before. Women in governments had to take on these new roles if nations were to survive the unique conditions of wartime, but the changes, once made, had a lasting impact. Women did go back to more traditional roles after the war was over, but women had proved that they were able to do jobs that had been previously reserved for men. But that's getting a little ahead of ourselves. This war is far from over. The battles that were fought in 1915 and 1916 were some of the bloodiest in history. After Germany's original plan to take Paris within weeks fell apart, Germany decided to beat France with a war of attrition. That meant killing so many soldiers the other side couldn't continue. German Chief of Staff Hockenheim picked the French city of Verdun as the target of a new German offensive because he believed France would have to defend Verdun to the last man. The German artillery started lobbing shells onto Verdun in February 1915. The Battle of Verdun raged on without a break until mid-July. As Falkenhayn had predicted, France refused to give up the city, even though it cost them nearly 1/3 dead or wounded men. The Germans suffered more than 250,000 casualties. Verdun itself was practically obliterated. Britain launched a major offensive on the Somme River in 1916, but it too was a bloodbath. England lost 60,000 men the first day. 4 months and 1.2 million casualties later, the battle lines had only shifted 7 miles. On the Eastern Front, Austria-Hungary was having a terrible war. They couldn't defeat Little Serbia, despite 3 separate assaults, and they kept losing battles to Russia. Then Italy joined the Allies, and Austria-Hungary had a whole new front to defend. Russia wasn't doing all that much better. With Turkey in the war, Russia's already sizable front got bigger. Russia had already lost many of her best troops in the first few months of the war. The ones who were left were spread too thin, badly supplied, and led by incompetence. The Germans attacked Russia in the north and pushed the Russians back 300 miles, gaining Poland in the process. These enormous losses prompted Nicholas II to take direct and personal control of the armies, which meant that any future defeats would be his fault. We'll see what that led to next week. Every nation that fought in World War I was changed by the experience. 15 million men died in the war, while many of the ones who made it home came home shattered in mind or body. Many of the women who stayed behind didn't stay at home. Governments fell in some countries, while those that didn't took over banks and trains and factories during the war in a way that dramatically expanded the state's role in the economy. That had a lasting impact on the 20th century.